Just recently, breaking news has emerged that could fundamentally alter the way millions of people across the United Kingdom access their own money, and the story is already sending shock waves across the country, particularly among pensioners and vulnerable groups who depend heavily on cash for day-to-day living, because reports are indicating that major banks are now preparing to restrict, scale back, and in some cases even bring an end to cash withdrawals at branches and ATMs, which means that's something that has always felt basic, natural, and guaranteed in our lives, like walking into your local branch and taking out your pension money or using a familiar cash machine on the high street to withdraw the notes you need for groceries or bills, may no longer be something people can rely on in the near future, and while younger generations who are used to tapping cards, using mobile wallets, and paying for everything through apps might dismiss this change as part of inevitable progress, for millions of pensioners across the UK this shift is frightening because cash is not simply a means of transaction, it is their independence, their security, and their way of keeping control over their financial lives. And it is important to understand that many older people still budget and organize their lives around physical notes and coins, whether it is paying for groceries at small local shops that do not always accept cards, keeping a bit of cash aside for bills or transport, or simply managing a tight fixed income in the most straightforward way possible. And when you strip away that ability, you are not modernizing, you are excluding, because experts are already warning that reducing cash access risks locking older people, particularly those in rural towns and villages, out of their own finances, leaving them unable to manage the simple routines they have relied on for decades. And imagine the distress of walking into the bank branch you have trusted your whole life only to be told that you cannot withdraw the cash you need to buy food, or standing at the ATM you have used every week for years only to find it removed or disabled. And this is not just a matter of inconvenience. This is about financial security, personal dignity, and social inclusion, and campaigners are right to call it out as a direct attack on pensioners' independence, because the truth is the shift toward a cashless society is being pushed far too quickly without serious safeguards for the millions of people who still depend on cash. And let us be clear, cash is not just about pounds and pence, it is about freedom of choice, it is about control, and it is about having the ability to live life without being forced online into systems that many people neither trust nor understand. So the questions we must ask are why banks are making these moves, who will be affected most, and what the long-term consequences are for pensioners and indeed for millions of everyday people across the country. And to begin answering those questions, we must look at how the banking sector has been evolving in recent years. Because for more than a decade banks have been trumpeting what they like to call modernization, and while the word itself sounds positive and exciting, in practice it has often meant relentless cost-cutting, widespread branch closures, and the steady erosion of services that communities actually rely upon. And if you walk down almost any high street in the country, you will see the results. Where once there were multiple bank branches, now in many towns there are none at all, forcing residents to travel miles just to access basic services. And at the same time, cash machines have been disappearing, either taken away altogether or converted into deposit-only machines that no longer allow withdrawals. And now it seems even the fundamental service of cash withdrawal is being put on the chopping block, with banks justifying it with predictable reasoning, insisting that digital banking is more popular, that cash demand is falling, and that maintaining ATMs and branches is simply too expensive. But behind the corporate language the truth is plain, because what this really comes down to is profit, as running physical branches and keeping ATM networks operational costs money, while pushing everyone online saves banks millions and boosts their profits. And so while banks benefit, ordinary people are left to carry the burden, and for pensioners, rural communities, and those without access to reliable technology, this is a disaster. Because it ignores the reality of how people actually live, and the fact is that millions of pensioners are not clinging to cash out of stubbornness but because it works for them, because holding a £10 note is tangible and clear. It allows them to see and understand exactly what they have, to set aside money for food, transport, and bills, and to budget in a way that is simple and effective on a fixed income. And removing that system risks creating confusion, stress, and genuine financial hardship. And we cannot overlook the accessibility issue either, because not every pensioner owns a smartphone, not every pensioner wants or knows how to use an online banking app, and even those who are willing may live in areas where internet service is unreliable, where broadband connections drop out, or where mobile coverage is patchy. And if you eliminate cash access in those communities, you effectively lock people out of their own money. And imagine a village where the last branch has closed. the nearest ATM is several miles away, and the mobile signal is too weak for online banking. How are residents meant to buy their groceries from local shops that still prefer cash? How are they meant to pay for essentials or manage emergencies? And these scenarios are not far-fetched. They are already happening in communities up and down the country, where cash access has steadily declined, and on top of that there is the issue of safety, because sadly older people are disproportionately targeted by criminals, and online fraud is one of the fastest growing crimes in the UK, and forcing pensioners into digital systems they may not fully understand exposes them to risks that physical cash avoids, because when you withdraw your money in cash you are in control and not at the mercy of scammers or hackers, and this matters deeply when we talk about trust and security, and although the government has promised time and again to protect cash, with ministers claiming nobody will be left behind and that legislation will secure the right to withdraw money, the reality in 2025 is that banks appear to be moving in the opposite direction, leaving many to wonder if government promises are nothing more than empty reassurances designed to quiet public concern while financial institutions pursue their own profit-driven agendas, and this is why it is so important to frame the issue correctly, because this is not merely about convenience, it is about rights, the right to access your own money in the form you choose, the right to financial independence, the right not to be excluded from society because you do not own a smartphone or you do not trust an app, and once we understand it as a rights issue the seriousness becomes impossible to ignore, because when those rights are eroded the consequences ripple out into every aspect of society, and we must ask ourselves what comes next. Will banks begin to decide how much of your own money you can withdraw or when you can access it? Will cash become so rare that it loses its practical value, forcing people to surrender to a digital system they never asked for? And at the heart of this is the question of choice, because nobody is arguing that people who want to use online banking should be prevented from doing so. Digital systems are convenient for many, they are fast and useful, but choice is the key, and right now that choice is being steadily taken away, and it is pensioners who are paying the highest price. And think about the practical daily consequences. A pensioner goes to the local corner shop to buy bread and milk. The shop is cash only because the owner cannot afford the fees that card systems charge, but the pensioner cannot access cash because the local branch has closed, the nearest ATM is miles away, and public transport is limited. So what happens? The pensioner either goes without or relies on help from family or neighbors just to access something as simple as their own money, and that is not progress. That is exclusion. And when we step back and look at the bigger picture we see that the push toward a cashless society is not a natural inevitability, it is being manufactured, because every time a branch closes, every time an ATM is removed, every time a shop goes card only, it is another nudge away from cash, and then banks point to the decline in use as justification, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that drives cash further out of society, and the impact of this stretches well beyond pensioners, because small businesses, charities, community groups, and market traders all rely heavily on cash, and without it their survival becomes uncertain, and children learning about money benefit from physically handling coins and notes, a valuable educational process that disappears in a fully digital world, and in times of emergency like power cuts or internet outages, if all payments are digital society simply grinds to a halt, whereas cash continues to work reliably, making it an essential backup and safeguard, and yet dismantling that system is happening at speed, which campaign groups rightly describe as reckless, and that is why organizations such as Age UK and others are demanding firm protections, insisting that cash is not a luxury but a necessity for millions, warning that once it disappears it will be almost impossible to restore, and reminding everyone that communities already know the damage caused when the last branch in town closes, leaving people cut off, excluded, and abandoned, because this is about far more than money. It is about dignity, independence, and inclusion, and we cannot forget the emotional impact either, as for many pensioners the simple routine of visiting the bank, greeting staff, withdrawing their weekly money, and planning their spending provides structure, confidence, and peace of mind, and stripping that away leaves behind stress, uncertainty, and isolation, with serious consequences for mental health. Because money worries are already a major source of anxiety, and adding the fear of not being able to access one's own savings is cruel and unnecessary, and it is not just older people speaking out, because many younger people also see the value in preserving cash, recognizing that it is anonymous, private, and free from the tracking that accompanies digital transactions, and they appreciate that cash remains woven into everyday culture, from giving a busker a tip to splitting the pub bill, and they understand that erasing it entirely is short-sighted and dangerous, and so the question is what can be done, and campaigners argue that the government must go beyond empty promises and enforce real protections through law, requiring banks to maintain cash services, investing in ATM networks across both cities and rural areas, supporting local shops that accept cash instead of penalizing them with high processing fees, and most importantly listening to the voices of those who are directly affected rather than the executives who view everything through the lens of profit, because this is not an issue that technology alone can solve. It requires compassion, fairness, and recognition that progress must not come at the cost of exclusion, and a truly modern society is one that includes everyone, not just the tech-savvy or the wealthy, and protecting cash is a vital part of keeping that balance. And as the situation develops, the most powerful thing the public can do is stay informed, discuss the issue with family and friends, support campaigns fighting for cash access, and demand that politicians and banks listen, because the louder our voices the harder it becomes for them to ignore. And at the end of the day, this is about far more than banking. It is about the kind of society we want for the future, because do we want a country where money is controlled entirely by digital systems, apps, and algorithms, where access depends on technology and millions are excluded, or do we want a country where everyone retains the right to choose, where cash remains trusted, reliable, and accessible to all, and the decisions being made right now, often behind closed doors, will shape that future, with pensioners on the front line but consequences that will reach us all, and the truth is once cash is gone it will not come back, which is why this moment matters so much, and why we must pay attention before it is too late. Because ultimately this is not just a banking issue, it is a people issue, a question of rights, independence, and dignity, and one that demands action now rather than regret later.